The Korean War began on the 25th of June 1950. It started with the invasion of South Korea by North Korea. As a quick overview, in 1945, following the Japanese surrender, the Soviet Union were in control of Manchuria and also the north end of Korea, while the US effectively occupied the south end of Korea to take the surrender. By 1949, there had been puppet governments set up by both. The US had one under Syngman Rhee, who was a fervent anti-communist, and in the north it was under Kim Il-sung. Now, both sides have been threatening to invade the other and to start a unified Korea. Now, in 1950, Kim Il-sung goes to Stalin and asks for, effectively, permission to invade. And Stalin isn't overly keen on it originally, but he agrees to pledge military supplies, but he doesn't pledge to actually commit troops because that might actually cause a war. But anyway, in 1950, or should I say in June 1950, North Korea invades, and the US used their status as one of the 5 veto holders to go and start a UN coalition to force North Korea out of. Now, you're probably wondering why the Soviet Union haven't vetoed this. And the reason is simple. They weren't actually in it because of the UN not recognising Mao Zedong's government in China. So it was relatively easy for a US-led UN coalition to start fighting against North Korea. Now, the North Koreans swept through South Korea very, very quickly, and the Allies found themselves pushed back effectively to a town called Pusan on the south end of South Korea. And the Pusan perimeter is basically the furthest the North Koreans ever got to conquering the entirety of Korea. However, there is a counter-offensive in September from the UN, and this is a US-led attack from Douglas MacArthur, who lands at Incheon and basically starts pushing upwards through North Korea from Pyongyang up into the border with China. Now, this is where Truman effectively tells him to stop because he didn't want to antagonize the Chinese. Meanwhile, at this point, Kim Il-sung is asking Stalin for more support, but Mao agrees to pledge support, and as we move into November 1950 and 1951, the People's Volunteer Army send over 150,000 men into North Korea to bolster the North Korean forces, and as a result, the tide begins to turn against the UN, and they start getting pushed back out of North Korea into South Korea. Now, at this point, Douglas MacArthur wants Truman to start using nuclear weapons in Korea. However, Truman is vehemently against this. He's seen what they did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and he does not want to repeat of that, and also for fear of his war. At this point, the Soviet Union have had their own atomic bomb since October 1949, and he doesn't want to escalate this to nuclear war. So MacArthur is sacked, and he's replaced by a man called Matthew Ridgway. Now, Matthew Ridgway is able to push back slightly and up to around the 38th parallel. And this is basically where the war stays from about June 1951 to July 1953. It's effectively kind of a trench warfare situation. No side is actually making gains on the other. Now, war would effectively have finished sooner, but Stalin was still alive, and Stalin wanted everybody to fight on, and that was kind of the huge problem that they had. It was that Stalin didn't want the war to end. It was only after Stalin had died and Beria, who was his chief of police, becomes in charge, that they were able to end the war properly. However, by this point, the US was a lot more confident in its position with Far East due to Japan, and therefore they were happy with the armistice, especially as the armistice allowed both Koreas to exist. There was a 2-kilometer buffer zone on each side where they couldn't launch attacks on each other. However, the problem was that loads and loads of people died. Over 1 million Koreans were killed and 54,000 Americans, plus more as part of the coalition. And Resolution 83, which was the name given to allow the UN forces to pursue, had actually proved quite costly for the Americans, especially so soon after the Second World War. And this was also quite influential. It meant that China had a safe border on Korea, but it also meant that after the war, the Chinese could step up funding for the Viet Minh in Vietnam and help them out. And it also meant on the other side, the Americans could not support the French in Vietnam, especially as the American public would never rally behind another war so soon after the one that was being fought. Thank you very much for listening.